in first session we have discussed about that is the what is the difference between the good workplace and the great workplace, and then I mentioned that is I will talk today in the second session, that is how to create the good convert the good workplace to the great workplace. Now you see that is the there are the relationship keys between the management, job with the employees and the other employees are there. So, when we talk about the great workplace, what is the great management is? As I mentioned about any management which is giving the freedom, flexibility and create a very wide canvas for their performance. It is not restricted, that is the you have to do this much only. How you have dare to go to the another place, how you have dare to go do these things which you are not supposed to do. Then if whatever has been done is for the betterment of the organization and with the very fine intentions, management is a great management. Another important aspect of the management is the great management is managing the resources. When a management is having the dream but not having the finance, if there is no finance but the dream is there, and then pursuing that particular dream with the belief that is the yes, the finance will be managed. What I want to say is that management who is visionary, that management who is having the very strong leadership styles, that management who is having the commitment towards the running the business, who is having a very great picture, global level picture of the business, and that is the great management is there. Great management is that management who is concerned with the employees, who is concerned with the society, who is concerned with the environment, who is concerned with the culture, and therefore their practices, their policies, their strategies, all objectives, goals, all are towards the one dimensions, and that is the anyhow we have to fulfill that dream, and dream of not only of the management, here the management means each and every stakeholder of that organization. When all are synchronizing to fulfill that particular dream, then we will talk about that is the that management is a great place work of the management is there. Second aspect which I would like to take, that is about the job. Now it's a $1 million question, that is what academic background the participant is having, the employee is having, and what type of the assignments are to be given to that particular employee. I would like to add one more dimension here, that is the what type of the assignment he wants to do. Now in the good workplace for which he is appointed and he has given that particular task, he is also happy, management is also happy, he is doing well, but it is not a great workplace, because then his colorful personality that has not been really utilized, he has not challenged himself. So what type of job one can believe I can do this particular job? 22 years back I was into the industry, and since last 22 years I am into the academics, and that time I was allowed by the Raymond groups to be associated with the academic institutes, and then the academic institutes they have realized my potential as a trainer, as a teacher, and still I am in connect with the all my bosses, because they have identified that is what type of the personality individual is having and what type of the training programs he can conduct, giving those opportunity for conducting those training programs, being an academician to interact with the students, interact with the faculties, interact with the industries people, and therefore the job was not restricted just only for the HR department. Job was the open for me for doing the multiple functions. I understand that is the many organizations having the vertical silos. Those silos are like, for example, their time office is there, or there is a labor office is there, IR is there, there is the HR department, there is a potential and performance appraisal section is there, there is L&D, learning and development is there, which is specifically. What I understand is a person who wants to be the trainer and may be restricted to the HR areas, then in that case he should know all the functions as mentioned by the ASTD model, American Society for Training and Development model, that is the all HR functions. You cannot be the successful in HR unless and until you are not aware about what are the recruitment strategies of the organization, what type of the jobs are to be performed in our organization, number of jobs, hundreds of the jobs, thousands of the job styles are there, what jobs are to be performed. It is not only the purview of the recruitment and selection department and section, it is also to be seen by the learning and development organization, that what type of the thorough knowledge is there. Any section cannot isolate with the IR, industrial relations. No, it is also has to know that is the what type of the labor laws are there, what type the rules regulations are there, how the unions are to be handled, how the communication with the other stakeholders of the society, what type of the research is going on in HR, what will be the HR. A trainer should be very much aware that is the after 10 years what will be the HR scenario. Nowadays everybody is talking about the robotics and they are saying artificial intelligence, and therefore they are talking about that is the future organizations, that is they will have the less manpower and the more machineries. Then what will be the role of HR in that case, what type of the training is required. Now you see, that is I would like to take the example of the SBI, State Bank of India. I remember when the first time the computers were introduced into the State Bank of India, and that where a lot of opposition was there because it was the false notion, that is introduction of the technology that will create more opportunities for the technical jobs and less opportunities for the manual jobs, and less manpower will be required, and this type of confusion was there. But now we see after almost 30 years the SBI, and then we find that is they have moved not only in the internet banking, but they have moved into the mobile banking. They have moved from the www to www, World Wide Wireless Web they have worked, and the business is expanded. So with the change and the use of the technology, the jobs, then employee has to see that is the, if he is the multi-skilled, multi-dimensional, so he should not be disappointed. I have taken for this particular job, and then why I have been asked to do the another job. Many times the young people especially, they find this type of the problems, that is the no, I have this finance specialization, why I am asked to work in the marketing, or I am in the marketing, why I am into the HR, and so therefore in the beginning they should be consoled, they should be talked by the trainers, HR departments, learning and development departments. They should talk about that is the job, what is the job. So therefore in that case, that the job is, that is the, if they are management graduates, they can handle number of jobs, they can perform efficiently and effectively in other areas also, because their core competency, and that is the managerial effectiveness, ME is there. So the relationship of this employee with the job, that should not be a fixed, that should be flexible. that should be variable, that should be adaptable, and that should be productive. So, actually this is Mott's model. Mott's model talks about, that is the, whenever we talk about the jobs and efficiency of a managerial effectiveness, then there are the three factors are there, that is the to be flexible, to be adaptive, and to be productive. An employee is required all this, and therefore you will find that is these employees, the relationship with the management and with the job. With the job, it should be a positive, it should be cohesive relationship. Every day it should not, he should love to do the job, one should love to do the job, one should not avoid the job at the workplace. And when we talk about the great workplace, they create with the help of trainers. Trainers are so important. They create that particular style of the job relationship, employee's relationship with the job, that is, I love my job. He is enthusiastic to do the job. He is very positive and affectionate towards the job. He is not doing the job for the bread and butter, but it is a way of life. He wants to do a particular job because that particular style of the life he wants to lead, and that is why he is in that particular job. It is not by compulsion, it is by choice. And when this type of the feelings and environment is there, then definitely that workplace will be the great workplace will be there. The third aspects, that is very, very important, and that is the relationship with the other employees. Like we know that what is a personality. So, personality is the way the person reacts and interacts. Stephen P. Robbins' book, everybody knows about that in OB. Now, in that particular relationship with the other employees, the person will come across a different types of the employees. My one PhD scholar, Vanit Kashyap, now he is a assistant professor in IIT Tirupati. Earlier he was in IIM Sirmoor, and now he talks about that is the servant leadership. The relationship when we talk about with the other employees, the first and foremost concept, that is how do you serve others, your other employees. Whenever there are the different types of the personalities are there, and when you have to interact with that personalities, some personalities may like to be supportive, some personalities will be like to be autocratic style, some personalities will be mixing style, some personalities will be reserved style. So, everybody, because the personality depends on heredity, environment and situation, and that is why we find that is even the twins are having the different personality. So, in that case it becomes very, very important, that is the what type of the personality has developed, born and brought up into the what type of environment. Because when we talk about especially in India, then we understand that is that there are different social environments are there, different culture is there, different practices are there. We are having the unity in diversity, and when such different diversified cultures are there, then different practices will be there. Not only the practices, different values and belief will be there. If different values, beliefs and practices are there, then definitely the person will like to follow his and expect that is the other person should also follow the same values and belief. But is it practically possible? It is not practically possible. So, therefore, in that case it becomes very important that when we are interacting with the other employees, we have the due respect for them. So, relationship with the other employees at the great workplace, everybody respect others. In the culture there is no leg pulling, there is no backbiting, there is not a cutthroat competition like this, that is the no I have to go ahead, other person has, no, it is a team building. They all are working together, And if this type of the relationship is there with the other employees, that workplace will be a motivating workplace, a great workplace will be there, because with the colleagues, with the superior, with the subordinates, good relationship is there. And if there is not a good relationship, there will be stress, there will be worries, and the performance will be affected. So, for a great workplace, it becomes very, very important, that is, we are having that particular style which will developing to have a very supportive management, the job matching with the personalities, and the personalities of the other employees is matching with the employees' expectation. Or if employee finds difficulty in matching that type of the environment, he has been trained by the trainer how he can be well connect with the other employees, how he can develop the job satisfaction, because job satisfaction is also having the two dimensions. One is job centricity and job involvement. Job centricity means that is the concentration on the job. You will be surprised to know many employees, those who are very much having the high job centricity, but they may not be having the job involvement, dear friends. So, they are doing their jobs, but there is no involvement, emotional connect is not there. So, therefore, the job satisfaction is there because of the job centricity, job concentration. One of my PhD scholar has done this particular research. Dr. Shyam Narayan's work is on this only, job satisfaction, and therefore, in that case you will find that is the what is the job centricity, job concentration, and then what is the job involvement. If both are high, then job satisfaction is there, and if job satisfaction is there, employee retention will be high, employee turnover will be low. So, therefore, these at great workplace, the relationship of the employees with the management, with the job, with the other employees is highly positive. And the role of a trainer is to create great workplace by imbibing the value systems which the employee will be able to love job, follow the management guidelines, and having the good relationship with the other employees, and this way you will find a great workplace can be created. So, I talk about the trust the people you work for with the all the employees, you have pride, already I have mentioned, and already earlier I have mentioned about that is the workplace is the joy, right, not coming late, not feeling demotivated, not feeling frustrated to come at the workplace, rather eager, anxiety and the very positive emotions are there. Yes, I have to go, just like a player who wants to enter into a playground, similarly an employee wants to enter into the organization to enjoy the work with the people they are working with. Now, here I would like to mention certain dimensions of the great workplace. The dimensions, the first dimension is, that is whenever we talk about, that is the credibility. What is the credibility? In the credibility development and the trust development, how it plays out in the workplace, communications are open and accessible. There is no hesitation, there is no barrier, there is open door policy. One can go and talk to his boss, I am not able to understand this, or I am feeling weak in this particular area, how you can help me, what type of training I should take, and that is a frequent communication is there between the superior and subordinate. And whenever there is a frequent communication between the superior and subordinate, and then most of the problems will be resolved because the communication is open. So, any problem is there, okay, let me talk to my boss, I will just talk to my boss and problem will be solved. I am not having any fear, that is what boss will say, तुमको इतना भी नहीं आता है, you do not know this much, no, nothing is like that, and therefore the trust is there and communications are open. Second important aspect is, and that is the competence in coordinating human and material resources. What trainer has to do? Develop that competency amongst the employees. What type of competency? In coordination. In coordination, the most important part is that synergy has to be developed. Unless and until you do not develop that synergy, there will be no coordination, and therefore, in that case that synergy amongst the employees, that particular coordination amongst the employees and amongst the human beings, that is becoming very, very important. So, if any problem is there, just you can contact and then you can get solved, just you can coordinate, you can help, you can ask for help, you can provide help, and that type of environment is there at the great workplace is there. Another aspect is mentioned about the material resources. Material resources, that is especially nowadays when we talk about, that is the use of the technology or technological gadgets. So, therefore, if this type of the gadgets or resources are there, then definitely in that case you will find that is the amongst the employees the credibility is very, very high. Third and very important aspect and credibility, that is the integrity in carrying out vision with consistency. Wonderful point is there. Now, you see, that is the, as I mentioned, dream jobs, dream organization, dream workplace, that is a great workplace, but that particular vision is consistent. Unless and until there is no consistency in practicing, we cannot achieve the goal, and this consistency means years together, maybe decades. If you want to achieve the excellence, if you want to make the best of our use of resources, if we want to do the best, we have to integrate our vision with consistency. For few days, for few years, I am having that dream, and then some partially the dream has been achieved, and then I enjoy, I say relax, okay fine, now the work, nothing is done, nothing is done. To do that, it becomes very, very important that there is a consistency, and that consistency, it goes up to the end. If the person is able to maintain that consistency, and then he will be able to get that credibility, that is the what type of the great work is there. Now, the role of the workplace, I have mentioned in the previous slide, that is the management. The role of that particular workplace, that is this integrity, that consistency, definitely it cannot be one sided. Consistency to perform, it cannot be only from the part of the employees, but the consistency is required, support of that consistency, work environment of that consistency is also required by the industries, and now in that case only this can be happen. Now, you see, as I mentioned, respect and regards, this is the very, very fine characteristics of a great workplace. How do you communicate with others? How do you communicate with the outsiders? How do you communicate with your superiors, subordinates, colleagues? Not in their presence, in their absence. In their absence, if you show your communication reflects the respect for them, nothing can be like that. Always they are talking good about what supportive professional development and show appreciation. Very nice point is there. Now, you see, that is the whenever we talk about this particular professionalism, that is the how do you appreciate. Everybody is having the strengths and plus points, everybody is having the weaknesses too, that I understand. But what is most important is that is the whether do you have that particular professional development, that you appreciate the positive points of others, dear friends. It is an art, it is an art of appreciation. And one can have that art of appreciation only when he is having a very, very positive attitude. He believes that we have read the number of stories of Akbar and Birbal, and then we understand that is from those stories, that is the appreciation is a miracle mantra. When we respect, appreciation is a sort of showing the respect in others. So, whenever we are having that particular respect, whenever we are having that particular appreciation for others, and as I mentioned, not only in the presence, not only in the presence, but in absence too. In the presence also we have to appreciate, because unless and until we will not express our appreciation, how person will come to know. But it is not only just in the presence of the person, but he comes to know that no, my colleague is a role of a colleague or role of a boss, that is he talks about good about me, and then that is the true wording for him. What trainer has to require? Trainer has to develop that particular training program which will be based only on appreciation, dear friends. To learn how to appreciate. If an organization which creates this type of the culture, environment and training programs and train the mindset of the people, that is, you have to appreciate others, you have to talk about the positivity of the other people, and then maybe you can see the miracles in the superior and subordinate relationship. If superior is appreciating the subordinate's skills, knowledge, his attitude, definitely he will have the high moral. If the subordinate is talking in absence of the boss, that is, my boss is very good, he is very nice, and when the boss will come to know, you can understand the miracle impact, that is the what type of the feeling will be there. So, therefore, in that case, that type of the respect and appreciation is to be there. Now, second point is collaborate with employees in relevant decisions. Here it is very, very important, that is collective wisdom. In a great workplace, it is always collective wisdom. It is not what I think is the right, that is the right. He is always in the contact with other surrounding people, that employees, that is the I am planning to do this. What is your opinion? Is it good or not? If it is good, why so? Even if he is saying good, ask why, and if he says no, it is not good, then also take information that what improvement is required to do that. So, therefore, in that case, collaborate with the employees and in the relevant decisions, it becomes very, very important. I remember number of case studies here, that is, whenever we decide the pay, earlier in our time 30 years back, it was the fixed pay structure was there, but now I find that they talk about the variable pay. Variable pay, it is a very, very relevant decisions. It is a bouquet. It is a bouquet, that is, the person is not only choose the whatever is given to him, he can articulate, he can design his own pay structure, and if this type of the freedom is given, that is, this will be the cost, CTC, cost to company. Now, you design, this much will be the fixed you can design, this will be the variable, it will be designed, and mutual discussion with the boss and superior, and then they find that is the yes, the relevant decisions is a collective decision. It is not going to increase the cost, but it will be given it will give a totally a different flavor, and in this flavor the employee will decide that is the what sort of that particular collective wisdom that they have to consider. Care for employees as individuals with the personal lives, this is very important. I remember, and you must have read also Dr. Kalam's books, that leadership style, and that they talk about, that is how the care for employees is to be taken. A great workplace, if we ask the feedback of many people who have worked with the Dr. Kalam, and always the one reference is always there which talks about how caring boss he was. It was not only at the workplace, that is the providing resources and asking for the performance and this and that, that is also okay, but the point is how much personal caring you are taking of that particular employees, right. And it is not artificial, it is by heart. People are smart enough to judge whether my boss is having, my organization, my great workplace is really caring for me or not. If they are caring, they will take the corrective actions, not the punishment. They will always ask, no, this is going wrong, you do like this, no, you do not do like this, otherwise this will happen, and therefore, and any problem, any help, and therefore in that case you will find that is in the respect when we talk about, then it becomes very important, that is how caring are you at your workplace is there. Dear friends, the caring and appreciation from this particular block, if you see, that is the collective wisdom is also professional is okay, but what I find is that is the appreciation and caring, these two values, when we talk about the respect, that will reflect a great workplace. Third is very mechanical point, but yes, important, very important, that is the fairness is there, right. One it is a tendency of human being to compare with others. One may be happy, but if he finds that it is the other who is having the low potential and he is getting more, he will be unhappy, though he was earlier happy without knowing this, but he will. So equity, a great workplace provides the equity, balanced treatment for all in terms of rewards. It is not like this that somebody is getting more, somebody, it is not on the whims of the boss, that is the to whom he is sharing the rewards. He is sharing the rewards on the basis of the competency, on the basis of merit, on the basis of the performance of the employees, the prior to this what type of performance they have done. It is on the basis of the behavior, it is on the basis of the attitude, it is on the basis of the value system, right. And when all are same, the equal rewards are to be there. So equity is subject to the certain benchmarking practices, that is true, but all are to be evaluated and to be examined. Second is impartiality. This is also for creating a culture of the great workplace, a very important part is there. Absence of favoritism in hiring and promotions. Right, because I love and like somebody and therefore that person is deserving the promotion, that should not be there. It has to be corrected, that is the person is getting this because of his merit, because of his competency, because of his concern to the organization. Always in decision making, it is not what is for me, it is what is for the organization. And the organization is also equally concerned, what is for the organization, but what is for the employee. And when there is a match, there is a great workplace. Justice, lack of discrimination, process for appeals, right. So always there should be scope. As a IR also, industrial relations, because I was for 6 years I was a labor officer. So therefore I understand that is the process for appeals are always to be available. And because this gives an opportunity for the justice, and when it is endorsed, means justice is correct. Therefore, it becomes very important, that is at workplace for the fairness is to be there, and that fairness will be possible only there is an environment of justice, that everybody gets justice here. If you are deserving, yes, then you will get it. There is no doubt. The seniors, when they talk about the juniors in the coffee shops, then they will say, if you are deserving in this organization, nobody will stop you, you will get it, and that type of feeling will be there at the great workplaces there. Another important aspect is, that is the pride of working, Like when we say I am working in this particular institute, I am working up in this particular organization and feeling the pride about it, and then definitely in that case that becomes a very important aspects is there. Like in personal job, individual contributions that are recognized, that is a matter of the pride, that is yes I did it. Everybody is doing, but I did it differently. Everybody is doing, but I did it in a special way. Then definitely in that case, that type of the personal jobs, individual's contribution, and that is having the high recognition at the great workplace is there. In good workplace, there will be the reward and just mention in the your pay slip, or it will be notion only that is you have done a good job. That is not enough. But here it is it will be recognized as an individual's contribution. So identity to an employee at great workplace, what it provides? Identity. It does not stop only by giving the rewards, but it gives the identity. Who are the pillars of this? Who are the knowledge workers in this organization? Who are the blue eyed employees in this organization? Who are the top performers in this? Who are the best employee in this organization? And therefore, in that case you will find that is the individual's contributions will be there. In work produced by one's team or work group, that will also give the pride. Like in especially in IT industries, you find there are the different projects are there, in manufacturing also there. So, there are different projects are there. A frequency in IT industries it is more, that is there are different projects are there. Now, if there are the different projects, then there are some very important projects, high profile projects are there, and are you a member or team of that particular project, and that is becoming a very important. That is a recognition. That is, I am working in this project under this leadership, and that leader is known in the organization for the great achievements. Then definitely in that case we will say that yes, that is becoming a matter of pride for an individual, right. So, therefore, it is the what makes a person in the organization, what type of the team or work group he is working, and that will become a very important. In the pride you will find in the organization's products and standing in the community, right. Whatever the organization's products and standing is in the community is there, that is what is the reflection, which division you are, what type of impression you are having, that will also give you a particular feeling and that particular sense of achievement, that is I am achieving this particular type of the community is there. Then the camaraderie. Now, ability to be oneself, right. Now, you see everybody wants to be oneself. How he has to be the oneself? He wants to prove himself, like I was mentioning about the identity, and to prove I am able to do this particular job in the organization, and in the organization whenever this type of the problems are there, the first name will be you go and ask X, because he has proved his ability to be oneself. That is, whenever there will be the problem, X is able to solve this type of the problem is there, and then that is recognition. Second is socially friendly and welcoming atmosphere. This become very important. That is the how the employees they are socially recognized. When you go out in the society with the relatives, with the friends, and then they say that is he is a employee of that organization, and they welcome you, and you can see that appreciation, that respect, that regards, that pride in the eyes of others, that is he is my relative and he is working there in that particular organization, that is a great workplace is there. So, whenever if the society recognizes any organization as a great workplace, and that those because of those practices, and these practices are developed with the help of trainers. So, trainers role is to create that great workplace with the help of supporting employees to develop those type of practices. Finally, I would like to mention about the sense of family or a team. Earlier also I have mentioned, that is I will give more weightage to sense of family, dear friends. A team is there. Team word is, I feel personally, it is more professional connotation. But when we talk about the family, it is a personal is there. So that involvement, that motivation, that commitment, that affection, that accepting those challenges, attitude, that sharing of the resources, that caring which is to be taken care of, that integrity, and that is true forever. Consistency. If these type of the dimensions are there, then definitely in that case the dimensions of the great workplace with this credibility, respect, fairness, pride, the camaraderie, then all these concepts with all these practices, and the role of the trainer will be to develop these practices, and if he becomes successful, then he will be able to convert the good workplace into the great workplace to work. So, I think that this is enough, that is how these different dimensions they pays out in the workplace, and how a trainer can convert a good workplace into the great workplace. Thank you.